He walked into the hospital in silence, not on a stretcher, but on his own feet. Eyes wide open, pupils dilated, skin cold as porcelain. The nurses thought it was delirium. The doctors called it paranoia. But then he said, "I haven't slept in over 40 years. And the most terrifying part? He wasn't tired. No dark circles, no tremors, no memory loss. His medical chart said, healthy. The EEG said, awake. But what his body revealed defied all known logic. What if I told you this man, a Vietnamese farmer, went 4 decades without closing his eyes, that no sedative, natural or synthetic, had any effect, and that doctors from around the world came to see him, only to leave with more questions than answers? Could the human body, under certain conditions, eliminate the need for sleep? Or were we witnessing something even rarer, a human being, biologically altered? The case was filed away, but never solved, and to this day, some medical records still carry the same haunting note. Total wakefulness, no collapse, no identifiable cause. You're watching Medical Mystery Files, and this case still haunts the halls of medical history. If you're drawn to stories like this, hit subscribe. But be warned, what you're about to hear challenges science, biology, and maybe reality itself. It all started with a fever and ended with 4 decades without sleep. The year was 1973, in a remote village deep in the Vietnamese countryside. The bombs had stopped falling, but the echoes of war still lingered among the bamboo homes. Among the palms and rice fields lived Ngoc, an ordinary man, a farmer, a father of 6, known for his kindness and for sleeping like a rock after every day of hard work. Until the fever came, high, sudden, with no clear cause. It lasted just 3 nights, and when it left, it took sleep with it. At first, Tai thought it was anxiety. Then, a lingering effect of the fever. But days passed, then weeks, then months, and he remained awake. It wasn't normal insomnia. No red eyes, no yawns. He simply didn't sleep. He worked during the day, took care of the house at night. And when silence covered the village, Ngoc would walk through the fields, eyes locked on the horizon, as if waiting for his body to demand rest. But that demand never came. His family grew worried. They brought in healers, priests, monks. Nothing worked. So they called the doctors. And that's when things got worse. The first physician thought it was an exaggeration. But after a thorough examination, he fell silent for almost a full minute. There are no signs of neurological fatigue, no indicators of chronic stress, he finally said. It's as if his body deleted the need for sleep. The diagnosis? Inconclusive. But one term started to circulate among professionals. Non-pathological permanent wakefulness. Never documented before. Never seen before. The case reached the capital. And with it came neurologists, psychiatrists, biologists. They placed him under observation. For 48 straight hours, with no rest, Tai answered questions, solved math problems, read newspapers, played with nurses. At the end of the second day, one doctor remarked, if he were faking, he'd have collapsed by now. But Tai kept going, awake, alert, unshaken. Some began to doubt reality itself. Others began to fear what it revealed. Then came the 4th day. Still lucid, Tai asked for just one thing. Can I go home? There's corn that still needs harvesting. They let him go. But the case remained, and more than that, it spread. At first as a curiosity, then as a medical mystery. Local newspapers printed sensational headlines. The man who defeated sleep. Scientific journals published cautious articles filled with words like perhaps, possibly, unexplained. But then came a letter that changed everything. Sent by a retired military doctor, it read, "Ngoc is not the first. We've seen this before. But never for this long, and never without consequences." That changed the game, because if this wasn't an isolated case, what else was out there, hidden? The answer didn't seem to lie in Thai alone, but in the place where he lived. And that's exactly where our story dives next, because Thai wasn't the only one. But he wasn't the only one, and that raised new suspicions. Was it genetic, or something far darker? Thai Ngoc returned home, and the world seemed to forget, but the village didn't. Because while international newspapers labeled the case an individual anomaly, the locals were already whispering a different version of the story, one that included names. Names of neighbors, of relatives, of others who also seemed not to sleep. First it was Thai's wife, then a brother-in-law. Later, a 9-year-old child who, according to her teacher, never blinked slowly. In total, 6 people from the same village were reported as suspected cases of chronic wakefulness. Too much coincidence? A group of researchers from Ho Chi Minh University decided to investigate. They traveled to the village, collected blood samples, studied genetic patterns, and conducted long, quiet interviews, often under the light of kerosene lamps. And what they found was alarming. All the cases shared one thing in common: a small mutation on chromosome 6, linked to a gene previously considered irrelevant. But this gene appeared to influence the production of orexin, a substance critical in regulating sleep. And that wasn't all. Families affected by the phenomenon described the same event: a fever outbreak that swept through the village in 1973, an unknown fever, of unidentified origin. It killed no one but left invisible traces. It was as if something had been reprogrammed, said one of the study's physicians. Over time, the scientists began to use a more direct term: post-febrile wakefulness syndrome. But there was a problem. The afflicted weren't suffering. No collapses. No psychotic episodes. No cognitive blackouts. On the contrary, tests showed they had sharper reflexes, faster memory recall, above-average immune systems. What should have been a curse looked more like an evolutionary advantage, and that's when the unwanted attention arrived. First, a foreign journalist showed up in the village. Then, a group of American researchers affiliated with a vaguely named organization, the Institute for Human Potential Studies. They wanted samples. They wanted to take Ngoc. He refused, and disappeared for months. But when he returned, something had changed. He was quieter, more observant, as if he had realized that the thing that made him unique also made him vulnerable. One day, when asked if he felt fear, he answered, "Only one thing scares me, that someone will find out why I'm still alive." The quote was recorded by one of the last journalists ever to interview him. And after that, Thai vanished from the headlines. But there was one detail no one noticed at the time. Among the blood samples collected by the Vietnamese researchers, one file was marked with a code, 10053A. It belonged to Thai. And that code would later reappear somewhere no one expected. In a classified medical surveillance report leaked years later by a former American researcher. Coincidence? Or evidence that Ngoc wasn't just a medical case, but a piece of something far bigger? To understand that, we need to leave the village and go deeper into the body, because that's where the greatest mystery of this story lives. How can someone remain awake for so long without ever breaking? How did he survive so long without sleep? And why didn't his body ever break? The human body needs sleep like it needs air, in theory. Depriving someone of sleep for more than 72 hours leads to mental collapse, hallucinations, tremors, heart failure. But Ngoc had been awake for years, decades, and he was still intact. This defied everything medicine understood about neuroscience, cellular regeneration, hormonal balance. It was as if he had found a flaw in the human biological matrix. In 1992, An international team, led by a Canadian neurologist named Dr. Henri Lafleur, received authorization to study Thai at a clinical center in Da Nang. For 10 days, he was monitored 24 hours a day. The expectation? That at some point he would crash. But what they discovered was something else entirely. Thai Ngoc's brain would enter for just a few seconds into microcycles of electrical oscillation that mimicked the lighter phases of REM sleep. But he remained conscious, awake. It was as if his brain had learned to sleep while awake. He's a hybrid between wakefulness and sleep, a state we don't yet understand, but one that may be hidden within us all, wrote Dr. Lafleur in his research journal. Even stranger, his body produced extremely high levels of melatonin, the sleep hormone, as if trying to induce rest, but being ignored. Cardiac exams showed a resting heart rate as steady as that of a monk in deep meditation. Blood pressure? Perfect. Brain oxygenation? Higher than the average elite athlete. And then came the decisive test. They injected Thai with a powerful intravenous sedative, strong enough to put down an elephant. He stayed awake. No resistance. No agitation. Just awake. It was as if his body had flipped the sleep switch off, but kept every system running as normal. This triggered chilling speculation. Was Thai evolving? Or was he an accidental example of genetic modification? Some suggested the 1973 fever had actually been exposure to an unknown biological agent. Others blamed trauma, neural adaptation, even chronic involuntary meditation. But none of those theories explain the most disturbing part. Thai didn't just survive without sleep. He thrived without it. Productive, clear-minded, physically healthy. And what if medicine had been wrong all along? What if sleep wasn't a necessity, but a habit? That possibility began to attract a different kind of interest. Military researchers, biotech companies, pharmaceutical corporations. Because if Thai was real, could he be replicated? But Thai Ngoc never wanted to be a legend. He remained in his village, harvesting corn, telling stories to his grandchildren. The man who never slept and didn't want to be awakened by the world's curiosity. Then, without warning, he vanished for 3 years. No interviews, no medical tests, no trace. And when he returned, something had changed again. His eyes. Less curious, more watchful. He said no one should study this anymore, that there were things the body is better off not revealing. 1 month later, Dr. Henri Lafleur's office in Toronto was robbed. The only digital backup of his files, gone. But among the partially recovered documents, one spreadsheet contained something strange. 15 names. Each with a location, an age, and a genetic marker identical to Thai's. And all 15 names were linked to the same project. With a code, File 10053A. The question was no longer how Thai was alive, but why? And the answer might not lie in hospitals anymore. Maybe it was hidden, in bunkers. From Vietnamese neurologists to secret U.S. laboratories, everyone wanted an answer, and some wanted more. When the spreadsheet leaked, listing 15 individuals with the same rare genetic marker as Thai Ngoc, the mystery ceased to be an isolated anomaly. It became a race. Researchers from Japan, Germany, Israel, all began quietly searching for the awakened, people who, like Thai, lived in a near-permanent state of wakefulness. But every time a new name surfaced, they vanished. Literally, hospital records erased, addresses outdated, families unreachable. As if someone were wiping the board clean. In 2001, a South Korean scientist named Dr. Min Jae Han published an article under a pseudonym. In it, she described the case of an 11-year-old boy who had never slept and showed identical neurological patterns to Thai. 2 months later, the journal that published the study was sued. The article was removed. Dr. Han disappeared. What once was a scientific inquiry had become a hunt. And who was hunting? Unconfirmed reports pointed to a covert collaboration between intelligence agencies and private biotech firms. The goal? To understand and possibly replicate sustained biological wakefulness. Imagine soldiers who never needed sleep, combat surgeons always alert, drone operators with 100% attention, 24 hours a day. The interest was obvious, but the methods were not. A British journalist named Nathan Cureton spent years investigating the phenomenon. In 2007, he published a 300-page online dossier titled The Eternal Watcher Gene. Within a week, the site was taken down, and Cureton was found dead in a Singapore hotel room. Heart attack, they said, but he was 34 years old. No known conditions. Among the files recovered from his laptop was a chain of correspondence with a Canadian doctor. Yes, Henri Lafleur. The final message from Lafleur read, "It's not just the genes, it's what they did to them." That single sentence reignited an old, buried theory. What if the fever of 1973 wasn't natural? What if it was an experiment? Vietnam at that time had been a testing ground for chemical, bacteriological, and pharmacological trials. What if Thai and the others were unintended products of something released into the air? Or worse, what if they were the unexpected success of a purposeful failure? Leaked documents from 2013, now known as the N package, referenced tests of neuroendocrine regulation via infectious vectors carried out in Southeast Asia between 1970 and 1975. The project name, Ngoc Somni, the absence of sleep. Tainjo never addressed these theories. But when asked, in one of his final interviews, what he believed had happened to him, he answered, "Sometimes the body survives what the mind will never understand." Since then, his whereabouts remain unknown, but a clue surfaced. An anonymous doctor sent a recording to the Medical Archive channel. In it, Thai appears visibly older, lying down, eyes wide open, with a calm expression. The caption reads, 10053A, final exam, no change. The video is only 12 seconds long, but what it reveals is chilling. Because in the background, on a digital panel, 14 other files appear, all active, all marked as under permanent observation. That brings us to the heart of the conspiracy, because if Thai is just one among many, where are the others? And who controls their medical files? The answer may lie in a document many tried to erase from history. A dossier filled with clinical records, interrogation transcripts, and disappearances, leaked documents, missing exams, and a pattern pointing to something no one dares to confirm. For years, the code 10053A seemed like nothing more than a bureaucratic oddity, just another number, a cold label. But then came the leaks. In 2015, a former employee at a research clinic in Nova Scotia released portions of a dossier that changed everything. It was titled simply, File 10053A. Inside were names, records, and what appeared to be a surveillance protocol. The most disturbing part? The dossier wasn't medical, it was military. It outlined the monitoring of 17 individuals across multiple countries, all sharing the same profile. Exposure to unexplained viral outbreaks, possession of rare neurobiological mutations, ability to remain in a waking state for periods exceeding 5 years. Thai Ngoc was patient 001, but the others were even more puzzling. An Indonesian woman who never dreamed, a Russian pilot who allegedly completed 620 hours of flight without a break, an American teenage girl who read 12 books a week and never fully closed her eyes. All were labeled biologically divergent, and all were placed under the same regime, passive monitoring, discrete containment. What did that mean? They were being watched. Yes, but not with chains or cells. Rather, through quiet agreements, compulsory treatments, and conveniently timed disappearances. At the bottom of each file appeared the same acronym, NSIA, Neurosurveillance and Intervention Authority, a division with no public record, but referenced in Pentagon documents under the seal of biosafety operations. And the most sinister detail, every official involved with the dossier had signed a clause. It read, "Under no circumstance shall the natural or induced reproduction of observed traits be permitted." Reproduction. They didn't just want to study the awakened. They wanted to prevent more from being born. But why? Perhaps their biology was unstable. Or perhaps whatever kept them awake might someday awaken something else. In the final annexes of the dossier, one partially redacted section left a chilling line visible. Sustaining states of absolute wakefulness is possible, but the cost remains unknown. Cost? What cost? Some have suggested that Ngoc and the others didn't sleep because they couldn't. Because if they did, their bodies would collapse instantly. Or worse, because sleep might unleash something within them, something we don't yet understand. Today, 50 years after that first febrile outbreak, nearly all the original patients are dead, missing, or institutionalized. Tai Isho was reported dead in 2021, according to unconfirmed sources, but no death certificate, no body, no rest. And maybe that says more than any autopsy ever could. The case remains officially unexplained, but File 10053A still circulates in the shadows, among fringe doctors, rogue biologists, and behind doors, where no one admits to reading it, but everyone fears forgetting it. And the final question, the one no scientist has dared to say aloud, is this: what if they're right to keep the truth from us? Because maybe sleep is not just a biological cycle. Maybe it's a barrier, a limit designed to protect us from a part of existence we were never meant to see. And Ngoc crossed it. Imagine waking up one day and never being able to sleep again. At first it feels like a gift, but soon it becomes a sentence, because the silence of the night begins to listen to you. And time, once something that passed, now watches you instead. Ngoc lived like that. 40 years with his eyes open. 40 years without shutting the world out. And the question no one could ever answer isn't how. It's why. Why did his body reject sleep? Why did science fall silent? And why did so many try to erase his story? Maybe because sleep isn't just rest. Maybe it's protection. And Tai lost that protection. In the end, the most terrifying part isn't that he never slept. It's what he saw while the rest of us were sleeping. What if it were you in that bed? If your body stopped obeying the laws of nature, would you endure, or would you break? The mystery of Tai still lingers, in forgotten files, in dim corridors of decommissioned clinics. But one thing is certain, medicine still keeps secrets. And some prefer not to be awakened. If this story left a mark on you, subscribe, because in the next file, the impossible could be you.